guys, welcome back. Today's case is going to annoy you. It's going to annoy you for a lot of reasons. Obviously because somebody is unfortunately going to lose their life in the case I talk about today. But what is really going to impact on you is how this death was absolutely preventable. Because essentially the prison system in the UK isn't working effectively. And it's going to example it perfectly in this case. Now, I'm not having a go at prison officers. I'm not having a go at prison wardens, governors, etc. They're working really hard with a very imperfect, flawed system that fails consistently to rehabilitate and fails particularly to rehabilitate very violent offenders. To put it in context, 3 in 10 violent offenders in prison are psychopaths, which means that when they go to prison, they just learn to out-psychopath the next psychopath. They become even more problematic psychopaths than they were when they entered prison. It's also why we have a huge reoffending rate where violent perpetrators are concerned. And yet we have sentences that allow these violent perpetrators back on the streets again and again and again and again. And I am at a point where I'm losing patience with this. I really am. And you'll understand it when I example this case today. Also, for those of you who are new to my channel, I release my crime content twice weekly here. So if you like deep dives and you are interested in crime, why don't you subscribe and get your notifications on? Also, occasionally I drop an extra episode as well. And to every single one of you supporting me on YouTube membership and Patreon, thank you so much. Can't do this without you, as you know. So with that said, let's kick off with today's true crime case. And it goes back to March 2024. Obviously, this is a very, very recent case. And 38-year-old Sarah Mayhew was lured to a flat in South London by a man called Sansom and his partner Gemma Watts. Now, she goes there innocently believing this is her kind of casual meet-up, but what she doesn't know is what lies in store for her is a premeditated, sadistic attack of the highest level, and one that she is never going to get away from. This case is utterly shocking. Before we go into details of what happened to Sarah, let's talk about her for a minute. She's the important person in this case. She was born in 1986, so she's an incredibly young woman. She's at the very beginning of her adult life. In spring of 2024, which is when this happened, she was just 38 years of age. She lived in a place called New Addington on the outskirts of Croydon in South London. And for people who think about London, who don't live in the UK, a lot of people think that London is very much the capital of the UK. Of course it is, but people associate it with wealth. And yes, it is the financial hub of the UK. It's also why it's got its own mayor and its own world, because everybody thinks London is the most important place in the world, even though it really isn't. But what people fail to often understand is there is a huge amount of deprivation. Economically, it's really hard living there. And understandably, there are issues associated and pressures associated with that. So even though Croydon has got some very expensive homes, for example, it's also got a lot of people who are really struggling financially there as well. And she's a mother. She's a mother of 2 children. She's got a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old. And one of the things that I've garnered from researching about her is that she was a really dedicated mother. She was really known for her absolute love of her children. She's actually really dedicated to her family, full stop. She's very much loved by them. And so her loss, as ever, is just incalculable to these people. But when you think about a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old, this is pivotal in their age and development. Imagine one day knowing that your mother is never going to come home because somebody has stolen their life. And in every paper, you can see how she had her life stolen. I've worked with children who have lost their parents to murder, and it's something that lasts a lifetime, of course, and it's something that very often is almost impossible to process because, one, it was so traumatic, and secondly, it's really hard to get a sense of closure when somebody takes a life because they just have a selfish intent. There's no reasoning behind it aside from that egocentricity, because it just feels so cruel and it just feels so rage-provoking and it feels so unfair. And the hole that will have been left in Sarah Mayhew's family is going to be enormous. Now, unfortunately for Sarah, in 2023, she signs up for a dating site, as so many people do these days. At the end of the day, we are human beings. We want to connect with another human being on the whole. And so, of course, when we're single, we want to find love. And these days, that comes down to often using the internet to internet date. The problem you've got there is that anybody can put anything on. You can look great on paper. Think about all the love con artists out there. They literally create a litany of examples as to why they are the perfect person. And if they look okay in the picture, you kind of find them okay looking. You can imagine that you would meet up with them with no idea of whether anything is true about what's said. And to put this into context, 30 years ago, you used to get married on average to a person who lived within a 3-mile radius of you. And the reason for that is because of the social networks that you were engaged in, the people that you'd be introduced to were usually friends of friends and so on and so forth, or colleagues. And so that was how you had a level of trust in the people that you meet. Nowadays, genuinely, it's like pick and mix, and you really might get a flavour that you despise. But she goes ahead and has the worst sliding doors moment of her life, because she ends up messaging Stephen Sansom. And they meet for a few dates. Evidently, they do begin some kind of sexual relationship, but it's just casual. And then the relationship fizzles out quite quickly, essentially. But what Sarah Mayhew is unaware of when she meets this, and I use the term man very loosely, there is nothing manly about this human being. He's a beast. It's as simple as that. She is completely unaware of the kind of human being that she's met, because Sansom's background is terrifying. So he was born on the 10th of May 1979, and he lived on Burnell Road in Sutton, that's in southwest London. And he's awful. He had a violent way about him from a really early age, and his criminal past was enormous, but it basically crescendoed, shall we say, on the 24th of December 1998. This, of course, is something that Sarah's unaware of. But on that date, and let it sink in, it's Christmas Eve, Sansom murdered a cab driver named Terence Boyle. He was just 59 years of age. He was a father of 5. He was just doing his job on Christmas Eve, just trying to earn money because he's got a family to provide for. And unfortunately for him, and again, a horrible twist of fate, Sansom orders a taxi from Terence's firm, which is Kendall Cars on Station Road in Croydon, and he wants to go from East Croydon Station to his home. But that isn't real. That's just a ruse to get a cab driver to him. What Terence didn't know at the time was that Sansom is armed with a kitchen knife. And he got into that taxi absolutely 100% intending to rob Terence. Because Sansom isn't the kind of person who'd go out and earn money for a living. No. He's the kind of person who feels entitled. In fact, he feels like everybody around him can be exploited. If he wants something, he's going to get it. And he'll get it however he chooses to get it, no matter how malicious and malevolent that is. But he doesn't just rob him. Sansom stabs him. In fact, he cuts his throat, and you know what he got away with? He got away with £25. That was all Terence had in his wallet. Terence lost his life because Sansom wanted £25. And just to say, the violence in this attack was horrific. The fatal wound was the right side of the victim's neck. It was 12 centimetres long and deep enough to reach the bone of the cervical spine. That's somebody who has thrust the knife right through. And there were other wounds as well. So there was a wound to his ear, his left shoulder. He had defensive wounds on his hands because obviously he was fighting for his life. And then Sansom leaves the scene. And Terence is obviously dying. He's seriously injured. And even though Sansom knows that, he realises as he goes away, hang on, there is a chance that that taxi driver might be able to call for help because he's got a radio microphone that's connected to the taxi company. So he went back and he cut the cable to the radio microphone to ensure that Terence, who was a dying man at that point, couldn't call for help. He made sure that the living witness was no longer living. Now, of course, the thing about Sansom is he's not very bright. So he got caught quite quickly. And on the 28th of May, 1999, when he's just 19 years of age, so just put that into context, I'm sure you all know 19-year-olds. A 19-year-old with that kind of malevolence and evil running through their veins, this is the kind of person that needs to be locked away for the rest of their natural life. But he does get sentenced for life for murder. He also gets sentenced for 8 years for robbery. So The minimum term, guys, for what I've just told you, apparently life for this murder, and also another 8 years for robbery, the minimum term is set at 14 years. 14 years. Apparently that's life and 8 years as well. You see, in the British courts, guys, you can serve a concurrent or a consecutive term. So a concurrent term would mean it will be served together. So basically, even though he's been given life for one crime and also 8 years for another, they're going to be served concurrently. So squashed together as opposed to consecutively, which means that you would serve one sentence for one crime and then the next sentence for the other after that. But no, 14 years. Now don't get me wrong, he doesn't get out after 14 years, but he does get out after 20 years. So on the 18th of December 2019, he gets released on licence. And like I said, that's really hard to wrap your head around when this guy was literally given life and on top of life an extra 8 years. But this means that in 2023, when Sarah actually meets Sansom, he hadn't even been out of prison for that long. But those 2 decades that he's been inside, surely they're going to have made some kind of positive difference to him. Isn't that what the system's about? That if he's been there for 2 whole decades, he's going to have learnt the error of his ways. He's not going to become more grotesque, more gratuitously violent, more evil. Surely not. And yet the case today examples that that's exactly what happened. What was he doing in prison? Was there any therapy? Was there any understanding of consequences? Was there any work on his nature? Who was doing the assessments? What was going on with the parole board? Because this man is somebody who is extremely dangerous and has now been freed from prison after the most heinous crime. And also the kind of crime that he engaged in, the murder of Terence, it shows you an absolute lack of compassion and a lack of value for other life. And it's really hard to impose that on another human being if they don't have it. And yet here he is, on a dating site, connecting with a lovely woman whose family adores her and who will have no idea of the danger that she is in, spending even a second with this human being. He's also, of course, meant to be monitored by probation at this point. You know, he's meant to have an officer who's monitoring him, checking out what he's doing. Certainly, as far as I'm concerned, somebody should be warning anybody that he's dating because he's a highly violent predator. And clearly, down the line, I'm sure we'll hear about horrendous failings where he is concerned. They aren't out yet, but I would imagine they'll come out in the future. And he isn't alone, by the way, in this case. There is another co-conspirator equally as malevolent, a woman called Gemma Watts. So Gemma Watts was born on the 22nd of July, 1975. So she's 49 at the time of her murder. And she lived on Featherbed Lane in New Addington. Now, she is somebody who has not got any violent offences in her past. But what I would say is that she is a depraved, warped human being. And indeed, from what we know about her, she has been somebody who engaged in very violent sex. She was described as somebody who had really depraved fantasies, also involving violence. So she is somebody who essentially is looking for opportunities to explore her sexuality in a very sadomasochistic way. She accepts violence from the males in her life and she enjoys violence as well. So if you think about somebody like her meeting somebody like Sansom, then it's folie à deux to some degree. It's the worst kind of scenario because these are individuals who kind of mirror each other's depravity. They're individuals who give space to each other's depravity and they essentially give themselves a permission base for pushing boundaries that shouldn't be pushed. And so this is really a match made in hell. Now, ironically, the reason that Sansom and Watts actually meet is in the summer of 2023, as I said, Sarah and Sansom had hung out, they'd had a sexual relationship, but it was clear that they weren't actually compatible. So Sarah introduced Sansom to Gemma Watts, and it seems that they hit it off. They quickly developed a really intense sadomasochistic relationship. And in this case, it very much is that he's the sadistic one, she's the masochistic one, although she's certainly a sexual sadist as well. But in this relationship with him, she is the submissive, he is the dominant. But that doesn't mean that Gemma Watts doesn't wish to also be dominant. It's just that he plays that role in their sexual relationship. And there are a lot of WhatsApp messages between the two that indicate this particular dynamic. There was even a video of Sansom beating Watts with a wooden spoon whilst they were having sex. I imagine that was probably around her head because there wouldn't be a lot of sense or difference even if you did use a wooden spoon on her head for several days at a time. Now, Watts, she did end up having visible bruises after these encounters, but she enjoyed it. She has got one of those neural feedback loops which gives positive reference when she actually experiences pain. And we see this. And by the way, psychopaths, just for a note, they also feel pain less, both emotional and physical. Just saying. Not saying that Gemma Watts is a psychopath, but it's very, very likely that she absolutely is. Now, on the 7th of September 2023, Watts sends Sansom a message saying, "I'm writing this of my own free will. Should any serious injury or even death occur whilst I'm with Stephen Sansom, let it be made fully understood that I enter the act of violent, dangerous sex games with Stephen Sansom of my own free will." And we can imagine, can't we, that that would be fine. Hi, 999, I need emergency services. Yes, what service? Police, probably ambulance as well. Can you just describe what's happened? Yeah, I've killed my girlfriend. Okay, well, I'll be sending the police and an ambulance, and obviously you're in serious trouble. No, I'm not in serious trouble. You think I'm in serious trouble, but actually she's died of her own volition. I've got a text that quite seriously states how she died is completely of her own choice, which is that I killed her, but that she wanted it. So essentially, I haven't done anything wrong. So you can send the ambulance if you want just to take the body, but at the end of the day, the rest of it, I'm just totally innocent. As if that would ever happen. As if writing a note would be like, okay, it's fine. There I was thinking he was an aggressive murderer for the second time. But now I've read that note, I realise he's just somebody who had good communication with his sexual partner until he killed her. You can't write this stuff, can you? Well, it seems that they can. Now, over the next few months, apparently they exchanged really graphic messages, all detailing their sexual fantasies, and all of these sexual acts involved violence. These were not text messages of a romantic kind. These were not sonnets to one another about the importance of one another's presence in their lives. They weren't organising, I don't know, trips to Nando's or to the park or to the cinema. No, these were altogether sadistic trysts that they were talking about. And also, usually those fantasies involved a third person. And they would be a fantasy involving a third person because nobody with an inch or an ounce of sense would ever volunteer to be alone with these two individuals sexually. You just need to look at the mugshots to know that that would be enough to absolutely 100% put you off. There'd be no swapping keys at any swingers sessions where these are concerned. The only keys would be the ones that you were looking for to escape in your car from these two absolute not rights. Now, significantly, Watts actually talked at length about wanting to have sex with Sansom while he was covered in someone else's blood. Doesn't Gemma Watts sound like the kind of person that you'd like working in the Women's Institute? I mean, with ladies like her out there, who needs men to murder us? Anyway, the reality is, this starts off, I suppose, as a sadistic fantasy, but I genuinely believe that, as I do with all killer couples, and believe me, I'm absolutely committed to understanding this area because my whole next tour is on killer couples and the research that I've done on what brings these together and fuses them. And often what happens in sexual sadistic relationships that play out into murder is that they've always been looking for that perfect partner to carry out the same kind of sadism they want. But it's hard to find individuals of that nature, thank God. But when they do, they start to push those boundaries. They start to have those conversations because it's about actually permission basing the actions that they've always dreamt of doing. We get to the 11th of September 2023. At this point, there's a really significant text exchange between the two. Sansom states, "Everything looks like meat now, don't they? A plaything, something to cut, something to bleed. They all look different now." Watts responds, "Wonder what they taste like. Cooked flesh, maybe even rare, so blood drips down our faces." Sansom replies, "People taste like pork. Consistency and texture are the same." I mean, with respect, Sansom, how many people have you ate? I imagine that he's just watched a few movies and that's been suggested, but it really does sound gratuitous and grotesque when he describes eating people as tasting like pork. The fact that the consistency and texture are exactly the same. And also, I do accept that people have sexual fantasies and they are fantasy only. However, just going to throw it out there, if anybody was texting me, or, what I'm really dreaming of is eating somebody, and I mean physically eating them, probably after cooking them, you'd be like, I am just going to, I don't know, go to a safe house and change my name, because it's terrifying that people even have those thoughts. To even conceive of that is terrifying enough, let alone to be sharing that information with another human being. Even if we had some bizarre idea in our mind fleetingly about something of such nature, the idea of ever texting that to another human being is something that I would imagine 0.00001% of the communities that we live within would do, because we all know it's warped and wrong. But not these two. These two get off on it. We get to the 24th of September 2023. Watts suggested that they fuck, feast and kill our way around the country. Now, Watts is leading this, guys. I appreciate that he is the dominant male in this relationship. Physically, he's stronger. Sexually, he's the more dominant one. But this woman, who is older than him, is also avidly involved in wanting to push these boundaries more and more and more. The fact that she's saying fuck, feast and kill our way around the country, she is really leading him. She probably knows at this point of his history, and it probably excites her, because one of the things that you'll often find with women who kill in these relationships is that people will think of them more as a victim. Oh, at the end of the day, if she hadn't met him, it would never have happened. And I call BS on that. And I call BS on that for a lot of reasons. But one of the reasons is there is a bias to believe that women are not as evil as men, that women are not as physically aggressive as men, that women are not as sadistic as men. And of course, I would say statistically that would be correct, but not when it comes down to these relationships. Mother Nature spawns certain individuals that betray their gender and betray what we expect for women in particular, and she is one of them. She wants to cause pain. She enjoys it herself, and she wants to be in control of another's demise. Now, Watts at this point says she wanted the blood of so many on her hands. And I would say that it's very clear that even though Watts hasn't murdered before, she's got an appetite for it. This woman was not led. She was not coerced by Sansom. She is absolutely thrilled, enthralled, excited by the idea of harming another human being. We get to October 2023. At this point, Sansom messages Watts to say he loves how fucked up her mind was. He says, so like mine, complete twins. It's good. So this is a classic example of a folie à deux. When we talk about a folie à deux, it's referred to as the madness of two or a psychosis of two shared. It's essentially saying that you meet somebody who mirrors a reflection of who you are, and then because you two agree that this is acceptable, it essentially creates a delusion that you have a right to go ahead and carry out the kind of acts you are carrying out. Think about Myra Hindley and Ian Brady as great examples. Think about Carla Homolko and Paul Bernardo, the Ken and Barbie killers. These are classic examples of a folie à deux, where they feel like they are better than the rest of us and they have a right to do what they choose because the other is reflecting that belief system too. So it may be that if they hadn't met, these horrendous things I'm talking about today would not have occurred. Equally, both of them have killing within their nature. It goes without saying. And sadly, that killing within their nature was something that meant they set their sights on Sarah Mayhew. So Sansom and Watts have decided that bringing in that third person that they've talked about in their fantasies was something that they actually wanted to enact in reality. Now, there were a few people that they looked at. So there was a potential candidate, shall we say, that was a young man that Sansom knew, but it became clear, it seems, even as early as September 2023, that Watts had an issue with Sarah. So Watts believed that Sarah owed her money, and she said that even if Sarah paid her, she was still going on her list. So even if apparently she gives her the money back that she believes that she's owed, that's not going to save her. She's still on that list. Now, I think the reason that Gemma Watts is so enraged around Sarah has got nothing to do with money. I think it's to do with the fact that she will be aware that Sarah has had a sexual past with the man that she is absolutely obsessed and infatuated with. And therefore, she feels that she wants her out of the way. Because even though Sarah doesn't want anything to do with Sansom, she's far more attractive than Gemma Watts, she's younger than Gemma Watts, she's nicer than Gemma Watts, she's kinder than Gemma Watts. So if you think about a competition base, Sarah Mayhew wins hands down every step of the way. And for somebody like Gemma Watts, who will have resentment at her core, she is going to struggle with that. And also, if she can get the man that she's completely infatuated in to actually help slay the woman that she sees as competition, then she proves to herself, actually, at the end of the day, he does care for me, and she was nothing. And that's something that she probably wants on an ego level. Now, the list that they made was headed with an image of a woman's body and hands which were held covered in blood. So again, very demonstrative of what they want to do. They want to hurt people, they want to cut people, they want to kill people. And this list was basically for people that Watts had wanted to harm or stab with a knife. And Watts did come across as quite obsessed with Sarah. She would go on about her at length. She would say that she was pissing her off, that she was somebody who she wanted to stab. She called her a skank. She's really, really disrespectful about her. So there is something deeply rooted in the feelings that she have towards Sarah. Now, Sansom and Watts clearly spoke about another woman as well being involved in the sex life. The messages evidence that. But Watts made it clear that this woman could be Sansom's sex toy, but she wouldn't be basically physically harmed or murdered. But she never made any such comments about Sarah. So she had some boundaries around some women, but not around Sarah. Now we get to November 2023. At this point, they're discussing how to get Sarah into Sansom's flat. And it's not going to be that easy because Sarah doesn't necessarily feel a deep connection with either of them. And she may even have some misgivings about hanging out with them. But nonetheless, get to the 9th of November and Sansom asks Watts how fucked up she wanted to get. At this point, Watts says, very. And so she suggests now it's time that we get Sarah into your flat. Sansom says, I'll try it if you want me to. And Watts says, only if it's a deal that she's not leaving in one piece. So what are we seeing here? Watts is leading Sansom. She's the one saying, yeah, get her in there and make sure that she doesn't leave in one piece. And believe me, when she's saying that, she's being literal, guys. Now, the conversation that followed, this includes Sansom offering to slit Sarah's throat over Watts's face. And then they discuss whether they have the tools. And Watts says, great minds think alike. So they clearly moved from a shared fantasy into just a formulated sadistic plan. They're taking their action from fantasy into reality. And they're thinking about exactly what they need to get away with it and exactly what they need to deal with the killing of Sarah. And Sarah is walking around doing things, living her life at this moment in time, completely unaware that these two individuals, who she knows, are plotting her demise in the most heinous of ways. And of course, the problem now that they have is that they need to get Sarah to Sansom's flat. So he begins trying to contact Sarah again. They've not really spoken since he began a relationship with Watts. And so we get to January 2024 when he sends Sarah messages via Facebook and WhatsApp, basically just saying, he'd like to meet up. Sansom's Facebook account had the username Red Rum, which is murder, spelt backwards. Again, I don't get how his probation officer was not looking at that and bringing him in. The idea that a murderer would have murder, obviously spelt backwards, nonetheless demonstrates that this individual has still got these kind of intentions and is proud of his past. And that's deeply disturbing. Also, he goes ahead and calls Sarah on her number several occasions. She doesn't really respond initially, but he's pursuing her. He's constantly getting in contact. So by the end of January, she's texted back. And this also demonstrates just how premeditated this was. And this plan was long term because they don't get a response initially and they keep pushing and pushing and pushing. So it's as if they've become really psychologically fixated on Sarah and pinpointing her as the victim. We We get to the 1st of March 2024. At this point, Sansom invites Sarah to his flat. And what he actually says to her is, I'm going to have a party on my own. He says he felt horny and that basically some white but not dark drugs. So the invitation is obviously offering out the idea of getting high. When we talk about light or white drugs, not dark drugs, we're thinking more about stimulants, we're thinking about cocaine, etc. And at the first point, she doesn't really immediately respond, but he just keeps encouraging her, and he actually says, please call, I'll wait until 10 o'clock to start my party. After that, we both miss out. Now, Sarah's friend, Paul Adams, he actually heard her on the phone to Sansom, and he said that listening in, it was as if she was actually trying to impress him. And really sadly, she decides that she's going to meet up with him. That's on the evening of the 8th of March 2024. And we don't understand why she did that. You know, they hadn't connected physically for long. It hadn't worked out. He was seeing Gemma Watts. But I would imagine that that doesn't mean that she didn't have some kind of attraction to him at some point. And hanging out for an evening, they'd casually met before. Maybe she just thought, why not? Maybe she was a bit lonely. Maybe she wanted a bit of adult time. Hey, maybe she wanted to get high. The point was, it took a long time for her to agree. So she obviously had misgivings and she wasn't desperate to see him. But there must just have been something about that moment, that night, that fateful evening that made her feel, why not? We get to 8:15 p.m. on the 8th of March 2024. Bear in mind, this is all a plan, isn't it? So Sansom and Watts are both together at his flat. At 11 p.m, Sansom leaves and goes and meets Sarah. She was actually last heard from by her father. She'd contacted him on WhatsApp, and CCTV footage actually shows Sansom and her entering the flat. And what we know is that while she physically entered the flat of her own volition, she never left alive. Now, one of the frustrating things is it's not exactly clear how Sarah was murdered. There is absolutely no doubt that Watts and Sansom lured her into the flat for depraved, violent sexual activity and sexual activity that would lead to her murder, but we don't have an exact cause of death. And the reason for that is there was a period of time that passed between her being murdered and her body being found. So on the 9th of March 2024, Sarah's body was basically still have been inside the flat, yet Watts and Sansom just carried on as normal. There was a neighbour who knew Sansom who said, do you know what? It really resonated with me, the fact that he was really chirpy the morning that I saw him outside the flat. Chirpy. Also, Watts takes her dog for a walk that morning and greeted the same neighbour. They aren't angsty, they aren't nervous, they aren't worried. They're just going about the business. Their conscience has not been pricked. They've murdered a mother of two in the most depraved of ways, and they're just chirpy and happy and going about their everyday chores as if nothing's happened. We get to the 10th of March. At this point, they realise they've got to do something with Sarah's body. So they decide that they're going to cut her up. They're going to cut her up. A mother, a loved daughter, a woman who had just thought that she was going for a social evening round to somebody that she knew's flat and is now going to leave that flat in pieces. Now that morning, both Watts and Sansom leave the flat separately. Sansom goes to B&Q in Sutton. He buys a 300mm hacksaw, a 300mm blade and a 14-litre bucket. He already had a power tools at his address. Watts bought clothes, bleach and other cleaning supplies, and then she also returns to the flat. It always blows my mind that these individuals believe that they can get away with murder and yet are so absolutely stupid. When it comes down to this kind of crime, somebody goes missing, they're going to be seen on CCTV entering your flat and not leaving. And the next minute you're pictured at B&Q basically buying a body disposal kit. And yet we see this time and time again because these kind of perpetrators are in the moment. They don't really think consequentially. They think they're clever, but they're absolutely deluded. They're not bright at all. And they make these schoolboy errors, and it's so good that they do, because otherwise we wouldn't find out what happened to these amazing human beings whose lives are taken. Now, after cleaning up the evidence, Sansom actually leaves Watts a really chilling voice note. And this voice note said that they had done the world a service. Done the world a service. Killing the mother of two. Now, the same day, a post appeared on the Red Room Facebook account saying, best friends are those who don't say anything when you show up at their door with a dead body. They just grab a shovel and follow you. So advertising it. You know, the arrogance of this human being. This superiority and belief in himself to such a degree that he thinks he can advertise it and that no one's going to cotton on. This is sometimes what I find really satisfying about Mother Nature. Mother Nature seems to stain these individuals with a level of narcissism that means that they can't help themselves. They expose themselves because they feel so much better than the rest of the world. They feel so much more superior to the rest of the world, and they just can't help bragging, believing that no one's going to cotton on. But that's a chink in their armour, and she makes sure that these killers have it. It's how they all end up getting caught on the whole. They just can't help it. They want to brag. They want to be proud of their work. Now, as I've said, Sarah Mayhew's body wasn't found for a period of time. It was actually at 9 a.m. on the 2nd of April. That's over 3 weeks later that some of Sarah's remains were found. They were found by a dog walker in Rodown Field in New Addington. Basically, their dog returned to them carrying a human bone in its mouth. They knew straight away that it was a human bone. They alerted the police immediately. Officers searched the rest of the park, and to their horror, with respect, they found Sarah's head, arms and legs in the surrounding areas. Some of her body parts were concealed under a metal sheet, and this was around 8 miles from Sansom's flat. The police, fortunately for the family, were quickly able to identify Sarah Mayhew's remains. So at least they could let the family what had become of her, because understandably the family would be absolutely desperate for answers as to where Sarah had gone. Her children, imagine feeling that your mother has just disappeared, and it's completely different to the expectation that you have, and therefore you've been worried about what could have happened to her. And even though it's the worst case scenario being told, well, she's never coming home, at least you have an answer. It's the not knowing that drives you to a point of distraction. And the truth is, now they have that information, they can start processing their loss. But equally, now they have this information, they know what happened to her. Can you imagine starting to process and digest the reality of the fact that your mother has been dismembered and discarded like rubbish when she's the most important person in your life? The police are desperate to bring in whoever is responsible, so they begin to track her last known movements. And of course, they resort to the CCTV footage and the analysis of digital communications. And it doesn't take them long. They find CCTV footage from the evening of 8th of March 2024, where Sarah is seen with Sansom and Sansom's dog as they walk back to his flat. So instantly, they are absolutely onto him. Police find CCTV footage showing both Sansom and Watts also visiting Rodown Field on the morning of the 11th of March. And also, surprise, surprise, these two individuals who think that they are criminals of such a great level are carrying bags of considerable weight. So essentially, banged to rights without a shadow of a doubt. Also, that same evening, they're captured on CCTV going to the River Wandle near Goat Road on Mitcham Common. Then they returned to Sansom's flat. They left about 90 minutes later with what must have been Sarah's torso in a suitcase. And then they go back to the River Wandle where it's clear that they leave her torso. So these two have genuinely believed that if they just spread her body everywhere, they're going to get away with murder. But of course they don't. And actually, they're arrested pretty quickly. The 6th of April 2024, Sansom's arrested at his flat. Watts is arrested later on the same day. Now, initially, they deny any knowledge or involvement in Sarah's murder, which must have been, I don't know, laughable to the police. You can kind of see it, can't you? Can you tell me what happened? No, I don't know anything. I don't know anything about it. Are you sure you don't know anything about it? Yeah, I don't know anything about this. But we've got you on CCTV literally going to the area that the body was found. Well, the thing is, I've got a dog and I take my dog for a walk in those areas. Yeah, you were carrying a suitcase that seems quite heavy after going to various places to get supplies to clean things and cut things up. Yeah, my dog likes really quite tough food. You're just making this up, aren't you? I am really, yeah. I just don't know where I'm going with this. I'm not very clever at all. Honestly, it drives me mad. But initially, that's what they do. They deny any knowledge of it. And so in the end, Sansom gets held at HMP Belmarsh and Watts gets held at HMP Bronzefield because the police absolutely know they're guilty as hell. They then are able to get a warrant to search the flat. At this point, police find a receipt of the items that Watts and Sansom have purchased. This includes a hacksaw, cleaning supplies, and they're looking around the flat and they find, again, a plethora of evidence. So they find a silver incinerator bin that had been purchased and had clearly been used in the garden outside. Don't get me wrong, the police never actually recovered what the evidence was that was burnt, but they had been desperately trying to burn evidence. Sarah's personal belongings have never been recovered, so I think we can assume that they could have been the things that were being burnt. Also, there were clear attempts to clean up, and a forensic detection dog actually indicated multiple areas of interest. One was at the bottom of a wall in Sansom's bedroom, and testing there just revealed an extensive amount of blood. There was also large amounts of trace blood found in the kitchen, the lounge area of the flat, and it's also likely that that's where she was actually killed. They also found traces of blood in the same bucket Sansom was seen buying in B&Q. So these guys are guilty as hell. Now we get to the 21st of May 2024, and this is when contractors who were conducting cleaning work actually did go ahead and discover the human torso in the River Wandle in Mitcham, South London. So the police at this point were called to the scene at 2:18 p.m. and of course that forensic examination revealed the torso belonged to Sarah Mayhew, and as we know, the CCTV had them actually going to that area with that suitcase that clearly had Sarah's torso in it. Now, like I said earlier on, it's complex when it comes down to the cause of death because of this time that's passed and also the way that she was dismembered. Because if you cut somebody's leg off, for example, that's probably going to kill them. So figuring out exactly what happened to her is very challenging. So they say that the cause of death is unknown, but we can kind of take some information from what's given by the autopsy and kind of assume, I suppose, what might have happened. So there's an examination of Sarah's body that found bruising to her skull, so we would imagine some kind of blunt force trauma to her skull. Her head had been shaved, so instantly we know she was tortured. It's horrendous to even begin to imagine that, but there's some kind of humiliation tactic there, isn't there? A woman is very conscious, on the whole, of her hair. And Sarah had lovely long hair. So to have somebody remove that in itself just makes you feel degraded on every single level. Now, they also found that 2 small vertebrae in her voice box had been broken, so we can again assume there was some heavy choking going on, or things were being shoved into her throat, so some kind of way of gagging her or forcibly placing things into her mouth. So again, that could cause some kind of suffocation or choking. We don't know what killed her, but I think we can all assume from those injuries, blunt force trauma and choking, and probably some kind of asphyxiation, maybe something being shoved into her throat itself. Now, when it came down to the fact that initially they were saying they were not guilty, they don't know what's going on, that couldn't go on forever, guys, because it's obvious to anybody that they are guilty as hell. Now, even though Sansom and Watts were saying that they had nothing to do with the murder, they were charged with it. They were also charged with preventing her lawful and decent burial. So on the 9th of April, they actually are formally charged on video link at the Old Bailey. Watts at this point had a visible bruise around her eye. One can only imagine how she got that visible bruise under her eye. One would imagine it's because she's a highly dislikable person who was maybe sharing a cell with the wrong person, just throwing it out there. Now, in spite of the fact that they were pretending that they didn't know anything, because there was so much of this mounting evidence against them, they knew that there was absolutely no way they were going to get away with this. They were going to get convicted by a jury. There was no way a jury would believe that they were innocent. And in the UK, you get a lesser sentence if you admit your guilt, which again, I really don't understand in many ways. Yes, I appreciate that we want to encourage people to tell the truth so that families don't have to go through horrendous ordeals of attending court and seeing the most horrific information about their loved one. But I feel that when you get quite large reductions on your sentence, that is not fair either on the family who've lost. Maybe you should get a couple of years off your sentence, but sometimes those sentences have a third knocked off and even more at times. And again, I think that's very cold justice for people who lose the individuals that they love. But nonetheless, we get to the 26th of September 2024. At this point, Sansom appears by video link at the Old Bailey, again, very, very famous court in the UK, in London. And again, he's the HMP Belmarsh at this moment in time, and he decides to change his plea. He pleads guilty. He admits Sarah's murder. He admits perverting the course of justice. And then we get to the 15th of November 2024. Watts also pleads guilty because she couldn't not have. At the end of the day, he's pled guilty. She was with him. So she is absolutely going to be dragged down with him no matter what, whether she's kicking or screaming or she's doing it of her own volition. So that on a fortunate level means that the guilty pleas avoid needing a full trial. So on the 30th of January 2025, the sentencing occurs. And that means that they just proceed straight to sentencing. So the judge was Justice Cutts. I do like that name. I don't know how I'd feel if I was about to go into court to be sentenced and they were like, do you know who your judge is? No. Is it Judge Kind? Oh no, Judge Kind's off doing some kind of voluntary work. Oh, is it Judge I'll be nicer than the average judge? No, they've lost their job because they were too nice. Who's my judge? Judge Cutts. Judge Cutts. Yeah, Judge Cutts, really good friends with Judge Dredd. Yeah. And also the Grim Reaper, but the Grim Reaper isn't actually a judge, but they're all friends, yeah. Anyway, Justice Cutts sounds amazing. The prosecutor was Tom Little. Obviously, the prosecution case painted the couple as they deserve to be painted. So the Old Bailey heard how Sansom and Watts had began basically a very depraved 7-month relationship where they were exchanging messages about shoving his hand down her throat and making her vomit, also watching pornography involving dogs, so bestiality, which is highly illegal in the UK for obvious reasons. And the court was also shown text messages between Sansom and Watts and also the video of him beating Watts with a wooden spoon. And that's partly because they want to demonstrate the dynamics of the relationship and also the complicity within the relationship, but also the fact that it's very provoking to see that kind of information because it kind of frames them as the individuals that they are, depraved and odd and strange and dangerous. Now, Tom Little stated that they demonstrated their relationship was characterised by sadomasochistic violence, said that the pair had a relationship of such intensity that they have often referred to dying together if caught. Do you know what? It really blows my mind. They were obviously going to get caught. Why did they never see this kind of stuff through? We'll die together if we get caught. You got caught and you're still here. You see, that's the thing about very many murderers. They talk the talk about never allowing somebody to take power and control over them, even though they've done the same to the individual victims that lives they've stolen. Yet when it comes down to actually taking your own life, it's a whole different ballgame. It's a whole different courage system because it's actually quite terrifying, the idea of letting go of your life. And if you happen to have narcissistic tendencies, you value yourself even though others around you don't feel that you have much worth. So it's very challenging for somebody like that to end their life because they often believe that they're better than the rest of us. Also, it's very clear when the prosecution present this in court that they don't have any remorse. So they sent messages to one another after Sarah's death. They actually joked over text in March about disposing of someone in a suitcase. So clever that they're actually admitting what they've done in jokes online to each other. And also what's brought in by the prosecution is that on the 8th of April 2024, this is while Watts is in HMP Bronzefield. Firstly, she confessed to the crime. Secondly, she said she deserved it anyway. Dirty crackhead. Literally. That's what she said. She also told a registrar at Lewisham Hospital that she killed somebody before. And on the 15th of April 2024, she told a member of staff at Bronzefield that she cut Sarah's throat with a knife. So this is a woman who's bragging about her behaviour. This is a woman who has enjoyed her work, has enjoyed the demise of another human being. And she's so proud of it that she actually wants to tell other people about it. And their behaviour in prison to date shows absolutely no sign of remorse for Sarah's death. In fact, they chillingly write letters to one another declaring that their love will prevail. I wish that we had more balls in our system. I am so tired of hearing the word human rights. Now, I get it. I'm human. I want rights. But you know what? Sometimes you should be denied those rights because of the fact you are not human in your actions. Watts and her partner in crime are not human. The way they've acted is not human. Why should they get human rights? Why should they get to write to one another where they can share their fantasies and they can talk about their love for one another when they've killed Sarah Mayhew, an innocent mother of two? And it gets worse. Their behaviour in court was absolutely despicable. Watts was giggling and winking at Sansom, called him her evil twin. I swear to God, our system is well and truly screwed. That people like this can literally ridicule the very courts that are there to sentence them. They don't think they've done anything wrong. They're still so lost in their lust for killing that the consequences mean nothing. And like I said, there should be some kind of consequence for this kind of behaviour. Now, when it came down to the defence, well, there wasn't one. But of course, they try, don't they? So it was shown by the defence that there was a personality disorder at play. So basically, they wanted to show mitigating factors to reduce the severity of Watts' sentence in particular. They provided the court with a psychiatric report conducted by Dr. Salim, who stated that Watts had had a difficult childhood and clearly suffered with mental health difficulties throughout her life. And Dr. Salim diagnosed Watts with BPD, borderline personality disorder. I mean, with respect, Dr. Salim, what reference does that have to the actions of Watts? Can we be clear? BPD is, quite rightly, often linked to childhood trauma because you can't regulate your emotions in the same way as a child and it can lead to more extreme reactions. So you can have a difficult time and you can, as an adult and teen, become borderline personality disordered. It doesn't have to be forever. We understand it in a more transient level now. It's not just a fixed term. But that doesn't make you kill people. It doesn't make you a sexual sadist. Dr. Salim, where's the sexual sadism? I mean, that's so clearly obvious, and yet apparently isn't there. Appreciate that you're working for the defence, but it's glaringly obvious that you don't even need a qualification to see the kind of depraved human being that this dangerous woman is. But I understand it. At the end of the day, they have to bring in these mitigating factors, otherwise they wouldn't be doing their client justice. Now, when it came down to victim impact statements, Sarah's mother, Angela Mayhew, obviously absolutely devastated by this. She gave a personal victim statement. She said, "It breaks my heart she is not around." She actually described herself as broken. I think that is such an apt term. I cannot imagine a better way of describing how a mother would feel knowing that her child had been brutalised in such a way, because you know what, it doesn't matter how old your kid is. It doesn't matter whether they're 4 or 40. You know, in those moments of pain and fear and distress, the only thing they're thinking about is mummy or daddy. It's just the stereotypical reaction of a child who's been loved. You just want the people who protect you. And for her mother to know that in those moments as she was losing her life, she was probably desperately wanting somebody of such a protective mechanism to be present. And knowing she couldn't because she didn't know what was happening to her daughter, I understand that that would leave you broken. And Sarah's father, David, he actually thanked Sansom and Watts for pleading guilty. And of course, that meant that they saved the ordeal of sitting through as a family the trial itself. But he added, "That said, whatever sentence you may receive will never compare to the pain you have caused us." I ask myself the same question all the time. Why did you have to kill her? Maybe I will never know. I think we can answer that. These individuals are selfish, egocentric, depraved individuals who care little for anybody's life aside from their own, and whose needs and impulses are more important than the breadth and value of another human being. They are dangerous beyond measure. They are human predators of the highest level. And I understand why her father can't compute it, because he's a good person. And when you're a good person, it's very hard to stand from a vantage position and to look in the direction as the person capable of such a thing, as an individual with the capacity to kill. It's so foreign to most of us that to even imagine it just makes your brain capsize. You can't conceive that anyone would wish to do it. You look for excuses, reasons, what had formed them, etc., to make them do these things. But the truth is that evil walks this earth. People have capacity for evil. Some people are simply evil. And I believe that the two people that I'm talking about in this video absolutely fit that definition. Now, when it came down to the sentences, Sansom was given a whole life order for Sarah's murder. Of course, there was no other option. He'd murdered before, he was out on license, he murdered again. And he did it in the most evil and depraved way. He's going to go to prison for the rest of his natural life. It goes without saying. Watts, I believe, should have gone to prison for the rest of her natural life. I believe she should be there with Joanna Dennehy. That's who I believe she levels and equals. She actually got life with a minimum of 30 years. It would have been 35 years, but the judge reduced the term by 5 years because she pled guilty. At the end of the day, she's going to be a very old lady when she gets out of prison, if she gets out of prison. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, I don't think she's going to. Taking a look at her, she ain't some picture of health. I would imagine that she'll take her last breath very much at Her Majesty's, now it's at His Majesty's pleasure. Now, after the sentencing, the police made statements. So the lead investigator, DCI Martin Thorpe from the Specialist Crime Command, said, "I would like to send my deepest condolences to Sarah's family and friends. A loss is always hard, but to hear about the way Sarah spent her last moments must have been heartbreaking. Sarah was a young woman. She had the rest of her life ahead of her before it was selfishly taken by Sansom and Watts for their own sadistic motive. No sentence can ever bring Sarah back or compensate for her loss." Alex Isaac, who was a former crime scene investigator, actually believed Watts was just as evil and dangerous as Sansom, but just hadn't found someone who shared her depravity. They said that when they're both together, they share their extreme fantasies and any obstacle to carrying them out is removed. She said when two people with these urges find each other, they don't just share them, they escalate them. Alone, one might hesitate. Together, they remove each other's last shred of doubt. I would absolutely concur with that. My Killer Couples tour is starting in the next week, which is pretty terrifying for me. You can catch me all over the UK doing my Killer Couples tour in theatres. And the reason that I've been obsessed with this is because of the fact that there are these individuals walking the earth, and when they meet each other, the murderous minds connect. And often I feel that people misjudge women and their capacity for evil. And cases like this absolutely highlight it. When two people meet and see a perfect reflection of one another, that can be for great good and it can be for great evil. The activation in those moments is murderous beyond belief. Sarah Mayhew was a good human being. She was loved and cared for by her family. She was a mother who was devoted. And she ended up dismembered and discarded. Why? Because two human beings met, shared their sadistic fantasies, and believed that they had a right to take whatever they wanted, even if that included life itself. I hope that Watts and Sansom have the worst time in prison. I hope they die miserable and broken. I hope that Sarah Mayhew finds a way to haunt every single second of their lives, both their waking and their sleeping. I hope she's in all their dreams, because essentially she is the person now who's locked the door on them. She is the person who is in charge and in power and in control of their lives. She's going to make sure that Sansom never walks free, and that likely Watts dies an old lady in prison. Let me know your thoughts, guys. Are you as infuriated with the system as I am? Let me know in the comments. See you again next time. Take care and be safe.